Okay, thank you. And I'll keep an eye just in case we have another participant that pops in. I'll leave that open so that I can admit them. So reducing your household carbon impact. I'm Susan O'Handley, and let me go. Did that just switch?
Yep.
Okay, good. So, just a little introduction to me. I consider myself a climate action advocate. I absolutely believe climate change is real, scientifically valid argument. I spent about 25 years in my history as an environmental education professional and a nonprofit administrator, kind of in that environmental world. And then I've spent 15 years in digital marketing through my own company. And marketing is basically, it's still education, like in a lot of ways. So there was a lot of what I found to be kind of tie over between marketing and working in the environmental field. I am a current board director and a past co-president for the Delaware Otsego Audubon Society. And portions of Schoharie County are in our chapter region. So this is beautiful. We don't always get to do programs kind of farther out in that region. So one of the things that I've been trying to do is to have opportunities for people within some of those outlying areas in our geographic territory so that we can reach them and bring them into our Audubon activities. I'm also the board chair for the Audubon Council of New York and Connecticut, and that is comprised of about 27 to 32 chapters. There's some that are kind of not quite operating fully, so, but we're still counting them because they do still technically operate. So that has chapters from both New York and Connecticut that participate. We get together twice a year. We do collaborative projects together, and we try to support each other in our work. And I'm also on the advisory board for the Audubon New York and Connecticut regional office as the chapter representative from New York. So I've got many different Audubon hats, and I really have just, it's a whole part of my life, all on the volunteer side. So, but it's very rewarding work. I love the quote from Christopher Reeve, once you choose hope, anything's possible. I went through a period of time where I did not feel much hope from an environmental standpoint and came to the realization that people are not going to stop working on solutions. And there are people all over the world who are very diligently working on trying to figure this out and trying to future-proof us to some degree. But the basic gist is we all have a part to play. So going through, why should we care about this? Why should we care about carbon at the household level, at the regional level? This is that very famous graphic. Usually you see the global climate. This is, the global temperature graph, but they also have it split out by region. So this is the North American version of this. Why should we care? Because science tells us that temperatures are getting hotter, and there are limitations to how our environment can really function well with a warming world. And one of the things that we see are just heat records. And I had put this presentation together about a year ago. I did go through it today and did a little update. But last year in July, we had record-breaking hottest recorded temperatures ever. We shattered records 2 days in a row, hottest day. Like, it was everywhere I looked. I found just news about these temperature issues. And then again in July, if we recall last year in July, we had those storms that came through. We had basically 5 tornadoes that hit the state all through that storm period, 1 or 2 days. And yes, it's affecting us locally. It's not just someplace else, it's something that's happening here. And there's a tremendous amount of damage that has been done as a result of these more and more severe storms that we're seeing, very much as a result of changing climate. Continuing in July, not only our area, but other areas regionally, Minnesota, New York rainfall, the Ozarks, Toronto, New York, Florida, Daytona Beach, New Hampshire, Steuben County, Vermont. So like this is happening everywhere, and the impacts are really significant. In July, at the end of the month, that same year, last year, $11 million in emergency assistance from state funds were dedicated to the response to that flooding. And then in August, like I just thought July was it. And then I kept seeing all these headlines. I was like, what the heck is going on? Hurricane Debbie came through Oxford, Connecticut, a couple of other places in Connecticut. They had this storm basically stall over their area for hours and just dumped rain like into their region. 11 to 16 inches of rain per hour at the Housatonic River in Connecticut. Blew out roads, flooded areas. This was down in Stony Brook, New York. They lost roadways. They lost like little freshwater containment ponds on the shores of Long Island Sound, kind of inland from that a little bit. But those broke through. Huge amount of damage. This was Steuben County. Same storm in August. Major disaster declaration needed, ravaged counties. This was an article in the Hornell Tribune in September, a $6 billion cost. Steuben County alone damage to roads, bridges, infrastructure at $50 million. So this is going to be expensive. As we went through the year, then North Carolina, I mean, Hurricane Helene was just an incredible and devastating weather event in a place where nobody really expected it. Really, really difficult. And then this year, certainly we're all aware of Texas, 24 inches of rainfall, overflowing Guadalupe, San Gabriel, Colorado River basins. Basically, Hurricane Ida, which was back in 2021, basically listed these things. I had seen an article. I have to just see my screen here for a second. Her homeowner's insurance increased by 55%. Her flood insurance policy increased by 47% and did not cover any personal belongings. And as of the end of this month, national flood insurance is no longer going to be available. So that means that there's no federally backed flood insurance, which is required for any mortgage in a flood zone. And that will lead for people to have to go through private insurance companies. It's going to mean higher prices for those policies. It's going to mean that there's less people who are going to be able to afford flood insurance, and that means that people will not be able to rebuild or recoup those damages. So the full financial responsibility for flood damage will more and more likely not happen through any kind of insurance coverage. So this is significant, and it's going to impact a lot of people, especially as these storms keep going and keep coming through each year. Moving on, let's see if I can get it to advance. No. There. We're all familiar with the canary in a coal mine scenario. So just looking, oops, going back here, sorry. Canary in a coal mine scenario, let's see if this will work. And it's not. Let me go back here. There we go. Basically, we've got the National Audubon Report from 2019, 389 bird species on the brink, survival by degrees, which is forward-looking at bird populations in a climate change scenario at different levels, and what is expected to happen to bird populations in the future. And then we had the 3 billion bird study from researchers through Cornell Lab. Since 1970, the number of birds continue to decline. And that is a past-looking, so it's a backward-looking study, looking at from 1970 through today, like what's happening with bird populations. So two different perspectives on the same issue. There's also articles and information out there about the sixth mass extinction. And these are basically issues that, again, we will have to kind of address going forward. What can we do about it? There are other ways that climate is going to impact us, and agriculture is one of those, because when we have droughts, we lose arable land, land that can be plowed or cultivated, land that is rich in nutrients, land that gets the right amount of sunlight and has predictable temperatures. That change also impacts pests and disease pressures. So there's greater competition for water and soil resources, and those pests and diseases are going to increase our damages to crops. There's also the flooding, which when you have excessive precipitation, you have difficulty planting. You have increased flood risks and damages that come from that. And then the heat itself, which reduces the surface water, depletes our aquifers, disrupts pollination and flowering of crops, and increases damages that result from wind or insects and diseases. In addition to these, we have health-related impacts. So air pollution and allergies, there's more particulates in the air when there's dry. We've heard about the dust bowls. Basically, you've got dry environments, you've got more particulates in the air when there's wind blowing. Extreme heat-related illnesses, water supply impacts. Like this is serious stuff. And then on top of all of the physical ailments, and repercussions, there are also mental health impacts. And we're now including that in the mix of health impacts. And I hope that we can all recognize that it is a real and serious thing to be considered as part of this. So the general gist is that where we end up going in the future is going to depend on what choices we are making today. So like now is the time and that turning point. Like there's still a chance that we can maintain or reduce those emissions and make commitments to bring some of those numbers down so that we can't get to those places of, more than, 2.5 or 3 degrees of global warming. So we'll look next at what we can do. So there are things that we can do. And I talk about households because households, residential properties, basically residential and commercial together make up about 31% of greenhouse gas emissions in the US. Industry, transportation, agriculture kind of are the other 70%. So yes, the bulk of it is not necessarily on households, and households, residential is only a portion of that third. But you think your small business locations, your, things you find in your community, the business you frequent, many of them in our rural out areas operate out of retrofitted or, kind of renovated homes, things that used to be homes. So I include those commercial properties, even though they're not technically residences. There are responsibilities there as well. And 1/3 is not insignificant. So when we think about our impact, 1/3 of our contribution can be, pretty significant. So we started looking at this and trying to do some seminars a few years back, and we did a program, an inside look at radical climate action. And what we meant by radical climate action was that, many households taking action has a radical impact. So, and that's basically proven. Like, we can make an impact. We just have to work together and all be kind of working in the same direction. And we did a series of climate action webinars. We looked at different areas where our households contribute carbon and did like a little feature on each of those. So those are available at the Delaware Otsego Audubon website, because we did record all of those and we have them available. And I would definitely encourage, they're a couple years old, but they're not outdated. And part of one of those programs, one of the presenters had mentioned the wheel of misfortune. And I thought this was just a really good way to visually help people understand what some of what we're talking about here in regards to risk. So basically, you've got the wheel of misfortune. And if we can hold things to a 1.5 degree change, 1.5 degrees of warming in global temperatures, then the chances of us landing on those bright orange spots, like in the left-hand picture, are much slimmer than if we let our global warming continue to increase and get to 2 degrees. Then the chances of hitting those dire things that might not happen every year, but will happen much more frequently year to year, and the averages will continue to increase. Those chances are going to be greater to have those devastating and really world-changing impacts. So I thought that was something that was very helpful to kind of overview. Shandu Viswazaria, and I always mess up that name because it's hard to pronounce, but I think I've got it. He is from down in the Hudson Valley, and he and some other very smart, very caring and dedicated people created this program, Cure 100. And their effort is to get communities to unite to reduce emissions by 100%. So talking about their household emissions and the emissions in their community. And they have a website, and it has some great helpful articles and some news pieces that they do on occasion, and it's something I definitely recommend. It's basically cure100.org, and the 100 is numerical. And one of the things that they look at, and I do transcribe to this 7 step piece, because I think it just makes it easier to look at kind of where in your household operations there are things we can do. So this is the average household and how the breakdown of your carbon impact relates. So electricity is a very small portion overall. Transportation is a huge block of carbon emissions. Building heat, food waste, and you can see it kind of steps down as you go. So looking at where your household has the most impact, those are the pieces you'd try to address first, because that's going to be the biggest reduction that you can make. And the quicker we make those, the better. And then once we have the big pieces taken out, we can start working on the smaller pieces. And one of the tools that they use at Cure 100 is the carbon tracker. And on the Delaware Otsego Audubon Society website, there's a little green C in that upper right-hand corner. And that takes you to a tool that people are welcome to use called the carbon tracker. And I want to show you a little bit about the carbon tracker. I'm going to stop this here for just a second and see if I can change my screen here. Okay, carbon tracker. So basically, I'm going to go to this, and then I'm going to access the community carbon tracker app. Because I did this. So this is my own personal journey. Basically, you fill out your profile. They have a questionnaire where you go through step by step to look at all those different areas of your household operations. So it'll go to like your electricity use. It'll go to how you heat your building. What kind of cars do you drive? How old is it? What's your miles per gallon approximately? Like all of these things that help you assess what your carbon input is now, so that as you make changes, you can start to see that level go down. You can actually track your reductions and how much carbon you've actually reduced. So I'm going to go to my carbon and my carbon trend, because this shows me in a nice little visual graph kind of what we did starting out, where we started out, and kind of where we went. Sorry, because it changes color when I mouse over it. But you can see the left couple of graphs. Basically, we have that blue section on the bottom for transportation. We, in 2021, in July, we bought a Chevy Bolt. So we went to a full plug-in EV. And immediately took out that carbon impact from our emissions. And then moving forward, basically the next big chunk of what we had was all in heating and gas cooking. So we made the decision in late 2022 or in early 2022, but it didn't actually take effect until later that fall. We were able to remove that by doing our home retrofits. So you can see basically we've reduced our carbon over the last 5 years. We've reduced our carbon input by over 50%. And that is important to me. The next big step that we need to do, according to our graph, is food and waste. So we have already kind of switched a little bit to doing like vegetarian meals once or twice a week, and that reduces the carbon input. Basically, that's something that has effect. One of the best tools on this is the expert carbon consultant. And I love this as a resource for people because once you fill out the questionnaire and you go through the trend, you'll get recommendations and guidance. So this one is for transportation. So basically, now it tells me, okay, you've done the vehicle emissions part of it. Now let's look at what are some other things. So consider a battery backup system, which, net 5-year cost savings. I I can't do that. We're not there, basically. This is electrify the yard maintenance. So when you're replacing your power tools and for, your lawnmower or your weed cutters or your trimmers, consider battery powered devices instead of gas powered. And that's going to help save more. Reduce your lawn maintenance. So go to mowing less frequently. Do a section of your lawn with a natural garden that has, pollinator friendly plants that can provide habitat for wildlife. Backup generators, substitute train travel, or find other means of transportation. And we all know these things already. These are not new, like carpooling to save energy. And then it will go to like heating and gas cooking. So we've done some of the big things already, but what are some of the other things? Improve your weatherization, maintaining those systems, because that does help keep them more efficient and helps them save carbon. Maintaining your fireplace and your heating and cooling systems. So for each area here, it will go through this. Electricity, and again, these are not anything new, but they have an impact. And they're smaller impacts maybe, but a lot of times they'll have cost savings associated with it, which is great for everybody. So you win financially and the earth wins environmentally. So if you can install solar panels, if you can sign up for like a clean electricity service, a lot of times community solar programs have options for you so that your electricity is generated using solar, even if you don't have your own solar panels. Making changes to reduce your electricity use, washing clothes in cold water, installing a clothesline, let your dishes drip dry, Energy Star appliances. So things like that. And these are all just a few, but they're good. Food and waste, basically adopting a vegan diet. My household's not ready for that. We definitely like to have those balanced with our proteins in there. But we have adopted 2 vegetarian meals at least twice a week. And we've been learning new recipes and trying to find good things there. So reducing meat consumption, and that's part of it. And then reducing our food waste so that we can more effectively buy only what we really need and not have a lot of leftovers or a lot of things that are thrown out at the end of the week. And I know my parents grew up during the Great Depression. So basically, my parents were like my friend's grandparents. Like there was like I was a late baby. My parents were in their 40s when I was born. But basically, my parents, having grown up in the Depression era, already had this mentality of not wasting food. And everything that was left over went into a soup at the end of the week. And my mother made some absolutely amazing soups. So those are all like great practices that a lot of young people that maybe don't have those backgrounds, and we're so used to convenience of things that we have to relearn them. And if you know those systems, then teach them to younger people. Goods and
Susan, I have a
service.
question.
Yes.
May I wanted to know if they consider in these calculations, the cost of manufacturing the batteries, like for transportation, or the solar panels, or what do we do with it
They
afterwards?
do. I'm positive they do because they look very closely at all those things in the associated costs.
That is the number one thing that I hear from people who are really sort of opposed to all
Yes.
this, is that they're not considering all the front end costs, so that
Well,
eventually,
yeah, having driving an EV and having done some of the little EV community car shows, those are things, because that's a question that's frequently asked, those are things we did research. And from everything that I have ever read, the operation of that vehicle basically makes up for whatever the production cost is, like within the first couple of years. So anything over like year two, you're net positive in the environmental benefits.
do you know if that's documented anywhere?
I'm sure it is, yeah. And I can probably find some resources if you want. You can email me,
Okay.
and I can follow up with you on that because we definitely hear that a lot.
Yes. Okay.
So goods and services, I'll just kind of jump in here. I'm going to finish up fairly quickly on this part. Is basically, and I'm surprised they don't have any recommendations for me on this because part of goods and services are buying local, using your local businesses as opposed to ordering online and having things delivered. Although there are some times when having things delivered can be more cost effective and more carbon friendly than local, depending on what it is. But certainly shopping your farmer's market and buying your produce, that 100-mile radius diet, are important ways to help with that. And then the last part of this is zip code overhead. And that is not necessarily your home, but things in your community, buildings in your community, your town offices, your school buildings, like anything that makes up your community infrastructure, your post offices maybe, although that might be a different can of worms. Basically, to work with your community to advocate for more sustainable choices and decision making on the part of your school board. Maybe to, yes, start investing in those electric buses with, maybe before the rebates run out. New York State does have a fairly significant program for busing. And I'm hoping that even with the federal eliminations of a lot of the rebates and incentives for infrastructure costs for the residential owner, the state hopefully will continue to step up on that and maintain their support for it because I believe they do know that it is important. So now I'm going to jump back and go back to my presenter view here and just check. All right. Do you still see my screen? And I'll see if I can make it full screen again. Okay, so tracking your carbon, and it gives you kind of the results at the end. So this was my carbon result, my total emissions in comparison with the average home in my zip code, and then an estimated average for a 4-person home in my household. So that one I did. So basically, we made the decision to do some energy retrofits in 2022. So just a couple of years ago. And basically, this section is going to talk about the decision, the work that we did, the costs, and the benefits. We basically, in 2022, we got a like, hey, pre-purchase your fuel oil for the year now and see how much you can save. And that was $11,000. basically, for the pre-purchase amount with the service agreement. So we knew at this point that our fuel oil, because we couldn't do the pre-purchase amount, was probably going to end up costing us close to $15,000 for that year. We had already made the decision to basically do some of our retrofits, and my goal was to eliminate this bill entirely. So we started out with researching. We went to NYSERDA. We went to Mohawk Valley Economic Development Office. They have a climate programs branch. We looked at single family residential programs. We looked at home energy efficiency programs. And I have a sheet, I think, with the links of all of these live that I can send out as a follow-up. We also researched with NYSEG on their clean heat rebate programs, and we also researched loans. And we ended up doing a good portion of work. We completely replaced our roof, which had been leaking, and it had 3 layers of shingles plus the original wood shingling underneath all of it. So we were at the point where we had to replace the roof. So we figured if we're going to replace the roof, we should insulate and do all of these things that are going to help make this an investment in our home. We did a heat pump hot water heater, which had been previously combined hot water heater with our furnace, which we found out was like well undersized for our house. We learned so much. But we did an energy audit, which was provided as part of NYSERDA's programs. We ended up not as part of our energy infrastructure, but we ended up doing a full kitchen renovation. And that was partly because when they come through to do the energy audit, they have to test any fuel burning devices. And our stove, which was the stove that was here when we moved into the house, was a propane gas stove, had like 3 times the emissions that it was supposed to have. So they told us, before you do any insulation, we can't do an insulation program unless the stove meets this standard. And there was no way in Hades I was going to replace my stove with a brand new one, and in this horrible old little farmhouse kitchen that was unfunctional. So we ended up with a separate loan to help us with kitchen renovations, and we did like 90% of the work ourselves, which was exhausting but so rewarding. We did insulation. Our attic, loose fill, we had to not box in all our old knob and tube wiring because there are some that are still active. We do have an upgraded electrical entrance so that, we're not on fuses, we're on the switches, so they automatically trip. So hopefully that will never be an issue. We did knee walls. We did our basement rim joists and just the walls, the upper edge of the walls. And then we did our windows. We got inserts for our windows. We did caulking and ceilings. So we took our heat load from 115 BTU, reduced it down to 84. And our existing furnace before our renovations was rated for about 80 BTUs. So that's part of why we were so darn uncomfortable in our house. We ended up doing air source heat pumps. We did mini splits, 7-ton system and 7 zones. So we have 4 units on our first floor, and we have 3 units on our second floor. 2 of those units on the first floor are fairly large, and then the second floor are a little bit smaller. So, and then we also did a 12 megawatt solar system in our backyard. So it was again, these were big decisions that we made, but the improvements that came from it were immense. Basically, if we didn't do this, we probably would have had to just move. We would have to leave the area because our house was just uncomfortable, unlivable in the winter. It was very uncomfortable, very cold. So, from a quality of life perspective, it just made so much sense, and I wish I did it 20 years before. In regards to the costs, basically, our energy related improvements ended up about $102,000. Rebates and refunds were 36, and that brought our net cost down to 66. Basically, so before we did our retrofits, our annual energy costs were about 16,000, and our annual energy costs now are about 5,000. So, and they're basically, that will reduce once we pay off the 15-year 3.25% low interest loan from Green Jobs New York. So,
Susan,
yep.
um, how did you have one of the large solar panels? How much does that contribute to your savings?
Well, it's producing about a third of what we use.
Okay.
So basically, because we transferred what we paid in heat, we now are using electric for. So that really tripled our use of electricity.
Yeah.
So, but the cost of that is still so significantly less than what we were paying in fuel oil that it
Okay.
still makes sense financially. So
Okay.
basically, ours is, I think it's a 20 panel, 15 panel system. I have to look to see exactly how many panels I have them on a other thing. But basically, one of the things I do want to talk about, just to kind of close us out as something to be thinking about, is that energy in rural areas costs more. And if you are in one of those low or lower income brackets, regardless of where you are, that percentage of energy cost as part of your overall is significant. So by demographic, 10%, almost 10% of a low income person's income is going towards energy cost. So, and that's not including like the cost of housing, like the cost of apartment rental or a house or a mortgage or something like that. This is significant primarily because energy costs in our region, electric in particular, are expected to go up by 23% in this current year. So my guess is you're likely to start seeing that cost on your bills fairly soon. In 2022, our median household income, and this was for Otsego County, was about $65,000. And that is still not a huge, like that $65,000 when you consider a mortgage and expenses, increases in living costs, your increases in groceries, insurance cost increases, health insurance cost increases. 23% increase in electric is going to be significant for a lot of people. And Josh Riley, I think, had been making the case to try to hold the electric providers accountable for these increases. Part of this is it's gets to be kind of complicated because now we have data centers. You probably are hearing a little bit more about data centers. We've certainly been hearing about artificial intelligence. The amount of electricity needed for data centers and the costs associated with that are going to be end up getting split to some degree, I'm sure, amongst customers of the service providers. Those data centers are not going to fund their whole electricity bill by themselves. That's I'm pretty sure I just read something about that. But more and more, those are issues that we need to be thinking about. I also just a quick hit list, what you need to do if you're interested in retrofits, educating yourself, going through your cost calculations and your budget and your cash flow and your credit score. What do you want to do? What do you need to do? And what can you do can be three totally different things. Protect your personal data. Suggest when you apply for any of this stuff, and as a general rule of practice, is to freeze your credit and open it up when you go for a loan or when you have, one of those searches, and then just freeze it back down after you're done with that process, just because that helps to protect your finances from people who are out there, hackers and people trying to get your information. And that brings me to the end. I'm going to stop and I'll take some questions and answers, and maybe hit on a couple of these things just a little bit more conversationally. But thank you, and please vote. That's that's my message at the end of the day. So, are there any questions? If anybody would like to ask a question, you can unmute your microphone and just holler, and I'll answer to the best of my ability. Okay.
I would like to go back to that slide where you had the temperature difference, the half of a degree difference in the consequences.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
It was
Let me
right
let me.
before the, I don't know where it was.
I'll
It was
find
in
it. I'll find it. I promise. Let's look. You can stop me. This one?
that one. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Now, it's hard for me. Like, I understand, I feel that global warming is a fact. It is hard for me to, though, debate with someone who says, what's the big deal about a half a degree? What can I, like, so you're showing this, but what evidence do we have, or what particular things happen? I'm assuming one thing happens and then it affects another thing, and then that affects another thing. So that's like cascades down to a whole bunch of consequences.
Yes, that is absolutely part of it, because in natural systems, things are connected to each other. We are webbed, you talk the web of life, like there's interconnections between a lot of different things. So losing a species, like we were talking with an entomologist about this, on the endangered burying beetle, which was a professor from Cobleskill, had been doing this study on the endangered American burying beetle. And one of the questions that she got asked is, why should we care that this one beetle is, endangered and could go extinct? And I loved her response, because she said, you don't know what removing that particular species is going to do to the whole web. Like it could be one tiny little thing that just sets off a whole chain of events that is devastating. and it may or may not happen, but the fact is you don't know it. So do we want to really chance it? So there is that interconnectedness piece of this for bird extinction, let's say, or bird habitat, like what they showed in, let me see if I can find it. Let me see if I can go to climate.audubon.org. Okay, so what Audubon did in 2019 was they looked at warming scenarios, that half a degree of difference, to see what change are we going to see. So this is the bobolink. Okay, so let's look at the current issue with bobolink. 100% of their population is maintained and stable. Okay. Basically going up to 1.5 degrees of warming. What we find in their predictions is that it's going to shift populations northward. So the bobolink will end up losing all of this territory in the red. They're going to maintain their territory in the yellow, and they're going to gain territory in the blue. Okay. And then if we go to 2%, so here's that 1.5 to 2 degrees in global warming, basically, you're going to find more and more of that range lost. So we're up to about 60%, some range gained, and some maintained. 3% is a full degree, basically losing range. Now, one of the things that we know, okay, they're losing range in one area, but they're gaining it in another. So theoretically, they could stabilize at that point, even if they're quite vulnerable. But the habitat is completely different. And secondly, more and more species are going through the same exact shift. So the more species that start to inhabit this smaller piece of the pie, basically, they're all going to be competing for the same resources. So having that concentrated abundance of populations and species in like a very small part of northern US, northern North America, northern globally climates is going to put a lot more stressors on that ecosystem. And will it be able to maintain those populations? Probably not. So that's why they basically have, a vulnerability status listed here. For this bird would be moderate under a 2 degree scenario. If we let it go to 3 degrees, that becomes a high vulnerability status. And you can do this, you can see those maps on this website. Basically, you can see all of, like, here's mine. I'll look for like birds in my area and birds in New York. So you can look at that that graph and those visualizations for those warming scenarios based on your zip code, and you can dig into each of these very specifically for each species. So I like to focus on birds because that's kind of where my interest lies and what I've been working, where I've been working for a number of years in my time. So does that help? I hope that helped.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking the people that are the naysayers, they're not interested in birds and they really don't understand what it might mean. I was,
Well,
you
I
know,
think when you put it in terms of the finances, Basically,
Yeah.
those billions of dollars in damages that are going to be happening every year, somebody's going to have to pay for it. And if the feds aren't contributing anything, then that's going to fall to the state. And that means your tax dollars are going to increase. There's no
Yeah.
way around it. So
Yeah.
basically, you're either going to have to out of pocket pick up those damages on your own, or you're going to have to pay so that the state can continue to have some kind of support for
Yeah.
people suffering those damages. Like, I think that's the main way to do it. For me, that financial piece of it, as much as the environmental piece was a push for me, that financial piece of it for retrofitting and investing in those retrofits, that was the turning point for me. Basically,
Yeah.
it was $15,000. That's more than my mortgage by far, or not by far, but at least by some.
Yeah.
Basically, just to heat my house and keep my electric on was ridiculous. And I was done with it. And I just said, either we do something or we leave because this is just not functional.
Right.
And seeing the numbers and how those were going to change made it a no-brainer decision for me. So
Yeah.
like that convinced me. And one of the things that I really want to do is I want to help people who want to do this. You know, basically, because it's not necessarily easy, to go through it all. Like, it was a hard process, and it was complicated at times. There was support through some of these entities, but figuring out all the numbers and the budgets and what are we spending and doing all those assessments and then looking at it and going, okay, long run, what are we going to lose? What are we going to gain? And to take out a loan, when we're approaching our 60s was a little scary. But that year to year savings just allows us so much more function. And it makes it a little less scary knowing that eventually the loans will be paid off and then, we'll be in a really good place. So
You're probably right that the cost will make the difference
yeah, I think that's one thing that everybody will understand is the finances. Like if you show them, like as climate warms and crops have less production in the end, or I don't know what that's called. I know there's a word for it. When there's less crops available and the costs of all of those things are going up in your grocery store, that's because of climate. Like you can go back and point to it and say, because we have all these severe storms, or because we have weeks of drought, or because we have wildfires that are taking over, counties and counties and counties of space. Those are going to keep going, and they're not going to slow down, and they're not going to get better. We might have a good year where we don't have them. The Canada wildfires, I mean, we saw that in our area. We had smog. Everybody loves the fresh air of upstate New York. And we had bad air quality index days, which was shocking.
Right.
But it's the truth of it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So if anybody wants to reach out to me, what I'll do is I'll put some of the links in an email out to you all, because I do have, I think, everybody's email address as part of registration. And then that way you'll have my email, and if you want to ask questions or if you need help with anything or you want to follow up, you'll have that information and you can contact me if you'd like to.
And then you can send that email out maybe at the same time as you send the link for this recording.
Perfect. Yes, I can
How
do
about
that.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes, and you should have the complete list.
I think I do, yes.
I added one today.
Was
just
that
this
Anne?
Yes, it was.
Okay,
Yeah.
yep, I did get that.
Okay. All
Great.
right.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. I hope we got something out of it, and I'm I'm happy to have met you all, and
Thank you very much.
certainly feel free to ask questions, follow up if you'd like to.
Thank you,
Bye.
Susan.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Susan.